there's a collective kind of community goodwill that is apparent all the time here, except when you go to the assembly chambers, and then it becomes like an alternative universe. When you walk in there, you're like, is this the same town I'm living in?
Welcome to the East Anchorage Book Club podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Gray. Today, we celebrate the 1-year anniversary of the East Anchorage Book Club. When we first started a year ago, we were only doing Zoom events. We did not begin the podcast until October. We, at that time, decided that we weren't going to record the Zoom events, but we did record that very first meeting, August 9th, 2021. And our guest that night was a big name, author Heather Lende, who is the Alaska State Writer Laureate for 2021. Lende is the author of a number of best-selling memoirs about her life in Haines, the most recent of which is 2020's Of Bears and Ballots, an Alaskan Adventure in Small-Town Politics, which tells the story of her time serving on the Haines Borough Assembly, where shortly after her election, a recall petition was launched against her. To give you some context for the conversation you're about to hear, although she does not speak, Anchorage Assemblywoman Meg Zolotel was in attendance and was enduring a recall attempt against her, one that would prove, like Lende's, unsuccessful. So, that discussion that night of emotions regarding recalls was especially relevant. Before we dive into the interview, here is a quick word from our wonderful sound engineer, Corey Coolidge, regarding his new YouTube channel about life in Anchorage.
Thank you, Andrew. As a resident of Anchorage for over 4 years now, I've come to love the city that I call home, and I'm always surprised by what I find here and who I meet. From interesting businesses and charities, events and culture, and of course, the great outdoors, there is something for everyone and always new things to discover. And that's why my new YouTube channel is called Anchorage Life, and you can find it at anchoragelife.net. It's a way for the people of Anchorage to take pride in their home and a window in for everyone else around the world. So I hope you take a minute to visit anchoragelife.net, and if you like it, subscribe to the YouTube channel so you won't miss new videos.
Heather Lende, welcome to the podcast. I was going to read your bio. Do you want me to?
No.
Okay.
No, you have to read my bio. But for those of you who don't know me, I'm Heather Lende, and I live in Haines. And I kind of know Anchorage, or some of you folks maybe, because for a long time I had a column in the Anchorage Daily News. I wrote a book called If You Lived Here, I'd Know Your Name back in 2005. And then another one called Taking Care of the Garden and the Dogs. And then another one called Find the Good. And they're all basically, stories about life in Haines and life and death in Haines, because I'm a long-time obituary writer for the paper, have a big family. My husband and I own a lumber yard in Haines, and I have 5 children and got 11 grandchildren at this point. So big scene, a lot going on in a small town, and that's usually what I write about. But then in 2016, I decided to run for the Borough Assembly, and I got elected. And it was very dramatic because it was very much mirrored national politics. And I was pretty naive going in, thinking that, first of all, that there was going to be the first woman president and my grandchildren would be so proud of me. And everybody knows me in Haines, and so they know how I think. So it's not like a big surprise, if I was more progressive on some issues and that I like the library and the swimming pool and trees, So I thought everybody knew that. And if they elected me, then that would be okay. I could represent them. But right away, like the next morning after the election, there were cries for a recall, that it was a mistake, that 2 of us, myself and the editor of the Chilkat Valley News, Tom Morford, were elected over a slate of much more, make Haines great again folks. And it was brutal. It was a really interesting experience. And it somewhat mirrored, what happened in Homer that you might be more familiar with. In the end, 3 of us ended up being recalled or voted, a recall election 9 months after I was elected. And actually, we got more votes in the second election than I had in the first. And all of us did, which was also good. The voters in Haines rejected the whole premise of it. I mean, they knew it was sort of crooked from the get-go. And and then I ended up writing a book about it, which I hadn't planned to, because I didn't really think that being on the Borough Assembly would be that interesting. But I just naturally tell stories about, things that I do. And honestly, there wouldn't have been a book if there wasn't a recall, because that then became very much, current with what's happening. And even since the book came out 2020, but even since then, a lot of what's happened in the world with COVID, with Black Lives Matter, with all the issues of last year, there are things that I also realized that government, really, and our system of government can really be, in many ways, has kept the status quo and that sort of patriarchy, and has been really is set up really for the privileged. I kind of knew that when I was on the assembly, but it's become more and more apparent, especially even following the whole openness of all the Zoom meetings that everybody can suddenly go to. When our meetings, who's going to go to a meeting at 7:00 on a Tuesday night that has kids or an elder at home or just a job and a life, and they need to, have dinner at home and regroup? They're not going to run down to meetings and sit there for 3 hours and listen to basically a lot of stuff before you even get to say anything on what you're interested in. Half the time when you go to a meeting, what you want to talk about is like the last thing on the agenda, and it's at 9:30, and you're sitting there the whole time. And it's not for every man or woman.
You talked about in the book about how your kids weren't super excited about you running for assembly, and that your husband had said something. I want to paraphrase it, about how it's in the end, it's probably not going to be any fun, or something like that. And I guess, with your family not really saying, "Do it, Mom," I wonder, why did you run for assembly? And how do you feel about their trepidation now as opposed to then?
It's really good that none of them have said, "I told you so." But they were correct, and I was wrong. And I think, and this is where politics disconnects from community. I live in a great community. I have a wonderful community of people around me, and Haines is very small. There's some people that are, I don't agree with them, or we rub elbows a little bit, but in general, even the grumps I have relationships with. I can't say I don't know them, and they're, they fix my furnace and plow my driveway and sell me groceries and teach my kids. We're all work at the clinic there. When you call the ambulance, they come, and sometimes they're not my favorite people, but there's a collective kind of community goodwill that is apparent all the time here, except when you go to the assembly chambers, and then it becomes like an alternative universe. When you walk in there, you're like, is this the same town I'm living in? It's like, who are these people that are yelling at us and who are seeing the town as, if you go to an assembly meeting, we're dying. We don't have an economy. We need timber. We need mining. We need to get rid of these greenies or these people that don't have jobs. And our kids can't stay here. And it's terrible because everybody's leaving town and we don't have any money. And why do we have to pay for a swimming pool and a library? People should pay for those themselves. And don't they know that we're broke? And don't they know that the economy stinks? And I'm like, wait a minute. We have a lumberyard here. It supported us and 5 children. It's not like a toy business. It's real. And it's here. And it's been here since 1986. The grocery stores those families are here. I have 2 adult children here and 5 grandchildren and 2 more in Juneau and 1 in Australia. And none of that really has anything to do with the economy because none of them even wanted to take over our business. So, I'm sitting here going, wait, that's not the story. But it's the story. It's a really popular story that people who get in politics seem to just repeat and repeat and repeat. And it's an Alaskan one too, I think. So that gets, and you sit there and you're like, what? I don't understand. So, and it's hard not to let that bring you down. Also, what I found was that when I went into assembly meetings, all my friends and my neighbors and everything, they're not going to go to a meeting. The only people that go to meetings are really people who are mad and they kind of want to put you in your place. And they're at the same meetings all the time. And so they end up having kind of undue influence on the representatives because then they can say, look, if other people cared, they'd be here, but they don't. So I represent people that do care. And I know a lot of people that think like me, you just don't see them, and then how do you counter that, with no polling and no numbers? You're going to say, wait, but it starts to get in your head. And yet I wouldn't tell my friends, oh, come to a meeting just, to help. I just had to keep trying to remember that about the community. But it can be hard. And politics also, sometimes the things, and I've seen films of the Anchorage Assembly meetings and read some of the things that have been said lately even, and it's kind of horrifying. But it's not any different than what happens here, I don't think. And yet I know Anchorage has a really great community of arts and people, and it's diverse and smart and all that. So, that's the difficult thing on the assembly. At least in Haines it was for me. So, but I don't regret being on it, because I know that I did help make decisions that were good ones. Mainly it came in hiring good people that are still there, because that's a whole nother level of public service, is the people who work in government. And that's sometimes neglected, when you're thinking about it. There's people that work there that are doing the right thing, and they can very much be your allies in this. The planners, the assistants to the manager, the clerks, they can help you with the process, and that's their job. And they're not really political. They're not the same as trying to deal with assembly members or with the mayor or whatever, elected people. The people that work in government usually are they're good. They're pretty much true believers in the process. And so those are your allies, I think, when you're trying to get things done, and they should be able to help you with ways to properly give the assembly information, or how to understand when to go to meetings, or which ones are important, or when to speak or not to speak. They can guide you that way, and they should be able to. So, no, I don't regret doing it. I also realize too that you can be a more powerful advocate for causes outside of the assembly than you can inside, because sometimes when you're there, then there's all the dynamics again of this particular assembly, and trying to, you pick the things that you're really going to hold on to and what things you can give up. There's a lot of compromise, where when you're in the audience, you can just keep talking about the library till you're blue in the face, and you don't have to worry about, the doors on the public safety building the way the assembly might have to when they're allocating funds. So there's that too. So, and you don't have to be at meetings for hours and hours. You can just go during public comment or write your letter and leave. So it's a lot less time. Yeah, no, I'm glad I did it. I think I helped two people that ran for office, a young woman who was a clerk at the liquor store, who was like 33 or 4, and she's on the assembly now, and an older woman that was an arts advocate. She ran too. And I think I inspired them a little. So that was good. And I think I never, at least in public, I never lost it. I was gracious and positive, and I didn't cry and I didn't scream. So I think that was a plus. That it was, for me, it was also sort of a personal a victory personally, to be able to come out of it feeling positive about how I at least had behaved in the face of some of it. And the other thing I can tell you is, like, I kept, what helped me too was thinking about people that I admired in the public sector, or even people who advocate for different things. And I thought sometimes over and over again about, like, one of my friends was Mildred Besser, whose husband is a retired archdeacon in the Episcopal Church, and her oldest daughter identified as a lesbian, and said that, and Mildred, this was back 20, 30 years ago, and Mildred darling, quintessential little old lady, pastor's wife, curly hair, sweetest woman you'd ever meet. I don't know if some of you know her, but she just advocated over and over again for equal rights and gay rights, and especially, marriage for her daughter and her partner who became her wife. And people said horrible things to Mildred. I mean, horrible. Legislators did, and assembly people in Juneau and places, and she just always just kept at it. And she was, when she was dying, was when the Supreme Court legalized gay marriage, and it was literally on her deathbed. She was watching it on TV and passed away, and said, "Well, now I can go." And I really admired that. She just was persistent, and that's one of the things that I've learned. A lot of this stuff doesn't come quick. Even Elizabeth Peratrovich, who we love as a civil rights leader in Alaska. I mean, it's kind of shocking that it took her, we hail her victory with the state legislature at the time, or the territorial legislature, but God, it took like 4 years. They didn't listen the first couple of times. I mean, and the things they said about her were horrific. And she just kept at it. You can't just turn around and leave and pick up your cards and go home, because then it won't work. So if you're really committed to stuff, you have to kind of stay in there and build relationships with people. And that might not be what you want to hear, but sometimes change takes a while.
You said that those people who showed up at every meeting, who kind of claimed that if other people cared, they'd show up. I'm the person who's showing up. You should listen to me. And how you were trying to sort of make sure that you didn't give them undue influence. I guess on the one hand, I want sort of to know how you're capable of doing that. And on the other hand, how can we be the people who show up and do have an influence? I mean,
I think, yeah. I mean, I think showing up is good. And I think not being intimidated and staying there, and walking in and saying hi and smiling and sitting next to people, avoiding the eye rolling, the whispers, the snarky stuff that can happen really quickly, laughing or, try never to do that. But that I think, every time that oftentimes that crowd, they can yell and scream, but so can another crowd too. So I think it's just really important to always be framing what you're doing in the positive. You're coming from a positive position. You don't say that these people, no, you're wrong. I don't like what you say. You just say what you want to say, what you want to have happen, why you want it to have happen, what you think the benefit to the citizens is, to the common good, to the community. And you just keep doing it that way. That does more, I think, than criticizing the other people or saying they're wrong. You just keep talking about what's right, what you're doing. I think that it's hard to counter that. If someone's nice and they're unabashedly pro what they're doing, it's difficult to yell. Somebody might yell at you, but if you say, thank you, and you don't take the bait, I think that's assembly people watch that. The other thing I think too is that if you can, and this is so unfair, but it's true, is if when you're going to meetings, if you can find somebody they don't expect to be an ally in something that you want, because pretty soon Anchorage may be just like Haines, where everybody knows what I could say. Everybody's going to know what I'm going to say. I don't even need to go. I just need to stand up and go, I'm for this. And I don't have to give like my 4 paragraphs of reasons in my 3-minute time. They know, Heather, we know where you're at. Likewise, Big Don, he doesn't have to give any reasons. He can just say, I'm against it. Because everybody knows that he is. But, like I wrote about in the book, that when you get the basketball coach, never says anything, stands up and says, I don't think this mine is such a good idea. I mean, everybody knows you want to keep your water clean. Whoa. I mean, there's like silence in the room, and assembly all leans forward, because it's a voice that's different than the local environmental group that has been there every single meeting pounding it out. And it's the people in the middle that often have the most influence. And if finding them to be there at the right time, and that's unfair, you might say, but I can tell you from sitting there, it's true. It's someone that they don't expect to have it's someone that they might even like a lot because they might have already decided they don't like me, but they really like that. They're done with me, but they really like that guy. And when he says it, it makes them go, at least they can't dismiss it. They have to look at it, and it might just get somewhere. So when you're going there and there's a big issue, if you can find some people that might not normally be who they expect. And the other thing too is when you're talking with them, if you can offer some other avenues, some solutions, some more meetings. I mean, they study things to death in government. And so at the very least, if you can just get something postponed rather than stopped completely. But if you can say, we'd really like to have a socioeconomic study. We think that's reasonable, how it's going to affect our property values, whatever. And obviously we want to solve the homeless problem if that's what it is, and we have some ideas. This is what they've done here and here and here. And you could even go the route, which some groups have done in Haines, particularly with the mining, was they actually held forums themselves and brought experts in and invited the assembly to come. We brought someone in from a small town that had a big mine, and we've got 4 speakers. We're holding a forum, and we welcome you. Brought someone in to discuss, maybe work with something like the Rasmussen Foundation. They've been very involved. If you could write a grant to have some sort of a summit and invite them and say, at least until our summit, let's have a discussion on what is the best way to do this. I mean, I don't know all the issues that well, but that's another really effective way to slow something down, or to do, not just slow it down, but also to actually do the right thing, with the situation, rather than just do the political thing or the quick thing that might not be so great in the long run for the entire community.
That's really good. Those are 2 really good ideas. A really emotional part of the book is when your sister has called and she's reading the names of all the people who have signed the petition to have you recalled. And your husband actually breaks down about one of the people. And so my question is a little bit about how you coped with that, and then sort of what the aftermath has been in terms of those actual people. Or I guess more generally, can you just talk about the recall experience?
Yeah, it was awful pretty much because, friends of mine signed my recall petition, people that I hang out with that I've known for years. And I didn't know it because I didn't look at it very closely. And then what Andrew's talking about is my sister called and starts reading it to me because they post it. That's the other thing, too, to be aware of. With all of your communications with assembly members, when you send emails, I don't know about phone calls, but emails certainly are all logged and they're all public. So assume that every email you send to an assembly member, even if you think it's not, it's just between you and them or an official, that it's public, that what you're saying is, and that's just something to know when you're interacting with government, even with a very friendly official. Like, you'll think it's sort of casual, and then it could come back to bite you. So just assume that every interaction you have with anybody in local government is public. And that's why I actually got to the point where it was just better to talk to somebody instead of emailing, even though it's quicker. And you think, well, that's courtesy. If I'm sending somebody an email, then I'm not bugging them on the phone. But sometimes it's better just pick up the phone, because an email can be used all kinds of ways that aren't necessarily positive. But anyway, it was very difficult in a small town to have people sign a petition that says basically that I conducted misconduct in office when I hadn't. And then to be told by them, well, it's just an election. It was just so we could have an election, and we supported elections. I'm like, no, it wasn't. If you read the fine print, you signed it because you said that I had lied and was incompetent. And I'm really competent. I read everything in my packet, and I know more about half of this stuff than anybody else sitting there, and I study it. And so that's not okay. And, I got to the point, like I would be kind of embarrassed. I didn't want to go to the grocery store. I didn't want to go out. One of my daughters was sort of dissed from her book club. It was very hard, and my husband's store was boycotted. Our lumberyard was for a time, but then actually people came in because of it, and I think we ended up doing more business. But a bad way to get business. And you realize that you're all connected to people, and people say pretty awful things. But then it's such an interesting thing. It's like when it's all over, everybody was like, well, forgive and forget. And you're just like, easy for you to say. But there's also some real wisdom there. I mean, I just had to. Then I had to stay for another 2 years and change and be on the assembly and sit there and make decisions with the people who would actually pass the petition, who were on the head of the Ports and Harbor Commission and the head of the Planning Commission. And I had to, the police chief, the manager, the people that had really gone after me, that I had to continue working with. And I had to kind of suck it up and be polite, not always agree with them, but I had to get back in the ring, so to speak. And then people in town, there's actually nobody that ever apologized to me, but people have been really nice to me in certain situations, and I just took it as, maybe I'm naive, and I just took it as an apology. One of the guys that signed my petition, my husband and I got stuck in our boat moose hunting on the river, and he turned around in an airboat and he pulled us out, and he got the boat on the trailer and he drove us home, and he went above and beyond. And he never said, hey, I'm sorry about signing that petition, and that was a pretty bad deal you got. But he spent hours helping us when he hadn't hardly spoken to us in a year. So I took that as an apology. and likewise, in the grocery store, one of the stores that was particularly not kind to me, when they say, oh, Heather, we got your favorite sourdough breads in. Oh, thank you. Okay, I'll take it. And I'll walk in the brewery, and it'd be some of the good old boys in the brewery. And, and I smile and say hi, and they say hi, and they say something about my garden or dog or whatever. And I say, thanks, So that's, maybe that's the best that you can hope for. And that's one of the things I learned that, and I write about that in the book, I guess, that, you have to accept apologies that are never offered. And you have to, because otherwise it's just on you. I know it's easy for me to say too, because I'm white and privileged, and, it wasn't so bad. My feelings were hurt, but ultimately I wasn't fighting for bigger causes, just the local community. So I can forgive. I don't know if it had been more fundamental or bigger things, but I can say that it's kind of on my soul. I was reading a poem by Joy Harjo, who's going to be in Anchorage. And she talks about, saying a prayer for her enemy. And she says in the poem that she has to pray for, the only way she can pray for an enemy is if she has a relationship with them. And then they better be careful, because if she lets them into her heart, then they may end up becoming friends. And that's a really wise statement. And I think that explains a lot, because in the current government mood, on Facebook, social media, comments in the newspaper, whatever, a lot of our enemies are people that we don't know, that we don't really need to let in. I don't have any idea who half the people are in Washington that I'm furious with. I don't know them, but locally I do. And so some of them may end up becoming my friends if I'm not careful, or maybe if I am wise, and that's the way we change. That's the way we change the world. It's not going to be, keeping to separate them. So it's tricky finding those people that are the ones that are the turning point, the basketball coach or the friend, maybe from some other part of your life that actually knows that you're okay and you know they're okay. And when you get into some trouble, even if your politics are so different, they may just end up surprising you. I mean, that's worth holding on to in relationships, even as you go forward. And I think the other thing is when you're dealing with politics, if you're constantly kind of reassessing and you know you're coming from a position of community good, love, sounds corny, but not selfishness, not greed, not some personal gain. You're on the high road, and that gives you some confidence in your argument. But and you just keep checking that. Am I saying this just because of preconceived things? Am I really being clear here? Am I fair? Is this just about I don't want it in my backyard, or is it more than that? Is it this isn't the best solution? You just have to keep reassessing your own values and your own reasons and making sure that you're there for the best reasons. And then you're always okay, no matter how mad people get at you. In the end, you're going to win, at least morally.
Your recall was actually about that 3 assembly members had done assembly business outside. So it was like a technicality because it wasn't really true.
Yeah, we didn't do it. No.
Right. So but as you said in the book, or maybe it was in the interview, it's all a blur now, but that the real reason was that these people disagree with your politics and they were after you from day one. Mm-hmm. And, the recall basically started the moment you were elected. And so I think what I'm curious about is how do you defend yourself when their complaint is with you? It's not with the fact that you had an email.
You can't. I mean, that was the problem. You couldn't. And we never got an opportunity to, because even when the radio station and the TV, the radio station and the newspaper did a big forum, before the recall election, finally to say, what was going on. They asked 3 of the recall supporters and then the 3 of us to come to a public forum in the Chilcutt Center. The microphones are set up, the water, you got the newspaper people, the radio, people could call in questions, the full audience, pre-COVID. And we walked in, the 3 of us, and it was, 4 days before the election. And the other side didn't show up. Not one person came because they couldn't answer the real questions. They didn't come, except one of the leader of the recall was in the audience, and when someone said, "What is this really about?" I said, "I don't know. Maybe you should ask him. He's sitting right here." And he said, "No comment." I said, "That's all you're going to say after like 9 months of putting our town through this, and us, and you're just going to say no comment?" But the newspaper put a photograph of it, by half of the front page. And I think that's what really ended the recall, when people realized they don't even have an argument. I mean, these guys are right. They didn't do anything wrong, and the people won't even say anything. However, the one thing I did note in the book is afterwards, I talked to Don Turner, who had organized the recall and who said no comment at the time. And I said to him, so maybe a couple months later, we're still not on really, he's not in my kitchen having coffee like he used to be, put it that way. But I said, how come why didn't you say anything? I mean, why didn't you? I mean, you're pretty good at drumming up all these signatures and driving to everybody's house and banging on the door. You must have been saying something to people to get them to sign it. Why didn't you say anything at the meeting? And he said something that I've thought about that I think is also part of the divisions that we have, and it's just something to be aware of, is he said, you and Tom, particularly speaking, the newspaper editor, he said, you make me look stupid. You talk too well. I know I can't say anything because you're going to make me look stupid. And it's a curse of being articulate and having an education. And there's definitely that part of what's happening in our country right now with a certain segment of it that are, and that's something to always be aware of. I never intentionally would want to make someone not feel intelligent. and not feel valued, and or respected. But to have him think that means that I failed somewhere, and it's just something to be aware of when you're in front of the assembly or in front of people who may not be as up on the issues or able to stand up in front of a microphone or write as good an email or whatever it is that puts them off. And I don't know how to fix that, but it's something to be aware of.
Hi, I'm Daniela Delozier. I live in Anchorage. My question for you is really, as an assembly person, how would you say that, like just a everyday person kind of like us, if we had an issue or that we felt like you also were on the same side of, based on comments in assembly meetings or emails or other things, we had a sense of where you were leaning. What's the best way for us to support you?
Well, I think the best way, and I don't mean this glibly, but I think the best way is to make sure that you don't waste the assembly person's time. I mean, if you already have them, if they're already with you, you don't need to remind them of the talking points or the issues, constantly be calling and saying, hey, there's a meeting tonight. Where are you? What can we do? Trust that if they're with you, they're going to be with you. And then ask them, what's the best way I could support you tonight at the meeting? Or do you need is there anything we could do that would help you to get this ordinance through or this on the agenda or at the time? Ask them. I know for me, sometimes it was frustrating that some of I used to hang up the phone sometimes with friends like I have who needs enemies. I mean, they're like, they'd see you at a party and there they'd go, or they'd see you in the grocery store. And it's like, I'm with you. You don't have to convince me. I'm going to vote for it. I'm on it. I'm introducing the ordinance. I'm 100% there. You don't have to do anything. I'm there and I'll do my best, but target the people that aren't, go to someone on the assembly that isn't. But I think I would ask them, because that sometimes, groups that are very zealous about something and have an assembly member's ear, then they tend to keep taking it. And that person is like busy and they're with them already. So they don't need to hear the arguments again. They've got it. They're going to vote for it when it comes up. They're going to vote with you. And so you don't need to keep communicating with them, but you might want to say, what could we do? And that's when I would say something, well, you need to call this assembly person, because I was in a committee meeting with the other day and they were kind of on the fence, and maybe have one of your people who does, he coaches Little League. Do you have somebody that coaches Little League that can call him to maybe sway him because he's close? Don't even bother calling this person because they're just going to get mad and they're never going to vote for it anyway, but it's going to be 3-4 and we've got this person that might just do it. And if you can find someone that knows them, see if you can get them to do it. That's when it gets right down to things. Then there also may be things like you can help an assembly person, for instance, if, and I don't know where you're at with something, but if there's something like a resolution, if there's something like the wording for an ordinance, if there's something for a committee, that you can help them with the wording and how it might be best presented. I don't know if the Anchorage Assembly, maybe they have people that do that. Maybe they get paid enough that they can do this, but sometimes that was difficult for me when someone would come forward and they'd have a resolution for a specific cause, and I'd be all for it, but I didn't want to write it. Like I would support it, but writing it takes time and proofreading it and all that. And if they could sort of send me the basic script and I could fix it up, that's helpful. And I'm a writer. So for people who aren't, that can be very burdensome of just expecting them to carry the weight of the whole thing. If there's people that can help with something like that, that might be helpful to an assembly person.
Thank you. Sarah Catherine has a question.
Your suggestion that we recruit people who aren't in the usual core of like 6 or 7 progressive people who can be counted on to actually show up to things, is excellent advice. And I have no idea how to do it effectively. I don't feel like I have more than maybe like one friend in the world who would attend an assembly meeting with me. And I don't think that I've got what it takes to just like Svengali a few people at the cafe into like telling me what's important to them, and then convincing them that certain agenda items are going to get them what they want, and getting them in the assembly, getting them to talk, getting them that hit of adrenaline, and then they're hooked. I just, that's the best strategy I have, and it's never going to work. Do you have winning, getting people in the door tactics?
Again, I think look at community connections if you have them. And I don't know enough about Anchorage connections, but if you look at the assembly and you look, I mean, if there's where they worship, where they go for entertainment, where they volunteer, if there's somebody in those lines that might cross over to your neighborhood or to an issue that you care about, that has a relationship with them, that might be someone to invite. And not to every meeting, but an important one. Like one, or to even have them just send an email to them. Hey, I'm interested in this, I'm concerned about this. And I hear, you're looking it up, have them call them on the phone, like make it easy for the person. They might not go to a meeting, but when they hear from someone that supports whatever it is that you're talking about, that is somebody in their inner circle, they might not change their mind, but they might listen more to that person, unfortunately, than they would to you. The other thing is too, when you talk about, and I'm there, the small group that you're going to the assembly every time, and it sounds nuts, but winning over even the other side can be as simple as when you show up in the meeting, like when you guys come, you've got cookies handing them out. I mean, I don't know like the COVID protocol, but like you're friendly to them. Like it's very hard for them to not listen to you because they're kind of liking you when you right away. And if you're friendly to the enemy, it's the Joy Harjo thing. They just might be glad to see you, and that changes the game. Instead of, oh, here they come again, they're gonna just talk and yell, and I'm not there. Where if they're like, these guys are kind of fun when they come in. I don't know if that's possible on all the issues, but again, boy, you catch more flies with honey. I just know that standing up and calling, BS on people or yelling at them, even if it's true, just you can just see like the hurricane shades come down. They're not going to budge. Where if they kind of like you, it's very difficult for them to completely dismiss you, and then at least you're still in the game.
I keep putting it on Lisa because she loves you. So
yes, I do. I wanted to ask a little bit about Raven Rant, which sounds like a small town version of something we have here, Save Anchorage. Mm-hmm. And I wonder what I understand that you get more flies with honey, and I definitely agree with that in person, and I do not argue over the internet. But when I see what they have written, it scares me. Do you see us getting past this time, this kind of Fox News inspired type of vitriol that we're seeing so much more of, and even in our small towns? I've recently returned to some fishing villages that I've lived in, and I think that it's gotten a lot more divisive, like it has on the national. And I'm hoping that with, like you said, with trying to find common ground and make friends, bring cookies, what have you. But at what point do you just disengage? I suppose.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's your own Waterloo. I mean, you disengage when it's racist, you disengage when it's homophobic, you disengage when it's violent. I mean, you have to, you can't be like, you don't bring cookies to somebody who's really, really bad. No, and that's a judgment, I should say, but who is totally against your values, and you can call them on it. You can just say, hey, this is not acceptable, not okay. And I like to do it not online. I mean, because Haines is small enough, when I see the person, I mean, I saw somebody, I look and I saw, the Haines chatters and was saying, at one point, kill all Democrats. We need to kill them all, Democrats or whatever. And this is a woman who walks by my house every day, walking her dog. And I went out and she goes, "Oh, hi, Heather." I said, "What are you talking to me for?" I said, "You just said you wanted to kill me online." And she's like, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, I'm a Democrat." And she was like, "Well, I wasn't talking about you." And I was like, "Well, think about what you're saying then." Because that's
like the
and then she was just like, "Oh, whoa,
crappy crabber.
sorry," and I'm like, there you go. And so you call them on it in person, and then they're like, "Well, I didn't mean you." I'm like, "Well, who do you mean then?" I mean, I read it, and that's how I took it. And so, I think then it's okay to call people on things. And mine again is very minor compared to what some of the stuff is said, but I don't engage on social media. It's no point. I mean, it's just every time I've done it, I regret it because I'll say something and then everybody jumps all over you, and it's just like, forget it. You can't win because it's just like whack-a-mole. Everybody's screaming and.
I see it on social media and then see them and, try to keep the two separate, I suppose. I don't look to make any friends or anything like that. But
hey, I saw what you wrote. I disagreed. I'm sorry that you had to say that. And a lot of times people back right down. They're like, "Oh, well, I wasn't talking about that." And no, you got a point. And I'm like, you got to be careful how you use your words because, boy, they can be real zingers. And then they're just like, oh, if they know people are watching, and if you say something to them in public, in person, it's so weird. Like in a small town, especially, that there's things on Facebook, and then you see someone in the grocery store, and like, are you not supposed to mention what you said about my kids on Facebook? I think I might just say something to you, And then when you do, they're like, "Oh, what? Oh, gosh, you saw that? Oh, gee, I didn't mean it." It's like, might want to think about that. And it, hopefully might not the world, but at least, something.
thank you.
But I don't know. Yeah, the answer to your question is I don't know how we do. And I think you're right. It has been. But the other thing I found, the one thing that is positive in all this is that I've watched in Haines lately, and it's like stuff you read on Facebook from Haines. You go to Haines Chatters, and it's supposed to be information like now about COVID. And of course, everybody's pro all the anti-vax and pro-vax. It's just like, wait a minute, this isn't what's supposed to be happening here. But it's only like 7 people. And they're the same 7 people, and they've made like 69 comments back and forth at each other. And, sometimes you just have to remember that. When you look at it and you start to like think everybody's crazy, it's like, wait a minute, how many people are actually engaged in this post? It's the same ones. And they're the people are fighting for the good, people are fighting for the bad, and they just keep going back and forth at each other. And then you realize, oh, it just poisons you to even read it. So skip it. What did you want me to read, Andrew? Which pages?
I wanted you to read. So I have the paperback. I don't know if that's different, but it's 128 to 129. When I write meet hostility with, it's actually, this is perfect. This is exactly what we're talking about, actually.
Okay. So this is this comes out from Meet Hostility with Courtesy, and I have some other notes I take. And just as a background, one of them. That when I mentioned Becky Nash, her son Aaron had died recently, and I wrote his eulogy, and she's my son's godmother, so that's where that came from. But this sort of chapter comes out of knowing the community through writing obituaries, and death and relationships. It's kind of weird, but it's just my life. But I'll read it. And I wrote on the top of my agenda every time at the assembly. I wrote myself notes, little things to remind myself to like behave, because at the dinner table, I can give people the what for, and I can swear sometimes, but I try not to in public. So I would have to give myself notes to like calm down, listen. I had a little list of notes that I wrote every time, sort of as a little practice to get me being mindful in the assembly meetings. When I write meet hostility with courtesy on my agenda and listen, I am mindful of all these things. But when I write, be kind, be brave, be thankful, I take a deep breath. This was Becky Nash's prayer for my only son. She is his godmother and wrote those words in a card she gave him before he left for a year in Australia. She wrote it again on the chalkboard in our mudroom after Aaron died. That's her son. My job writing obituaries at the Chilkat Valley News helps keep politics in perspective. Some people, my favorite ones often, devote their lives to causes that they care about, that make the world a better place, from parks and preschools to mental health care and the arts. Their families proudly note those accomplishments and commitment to them, especially in the face of adversity. When I write obits, no one has ever asked me to tally Grandpa's wealth or make sure readers know what presidential candidates he voted for. A graduation date, the names of their children, or the way the sun caught Aaron's smile when he soared through the air on his snowboard are all more relevant in the end than money and politics. Issues, maybe, such as that they cared about family planning or were instrumental in developing the tourism industry. But politics? No.
Thank you so much.
You're
Heather.
welcome.
It has been such a pleasure to have you.
I thank you, Andrew, for asking me. I don't know if I've helped you all much, but if there's anything I can do, I don't hesitate to contact me again. And I got to go make my dad and my husband dinner.
Well, thank you again. We're all super grateful. Have a great night.
All right. Thank you.
It turned out Heather Lende was of enormous help. We had no idea at that time how things would change for us at the East Anchorage Book Club and at Anchorage Action. We tried many of the things that she suggested. We hosted our own forums and invited assembly members. We tried to cultivate relationships with local leaders. And last Christmas, I even brought some treats to the Anchorage Assembly meeting. I shared them with my friends, but I also shared them with other folks in the chambers, people whom I had had great disagreements with. And you know what? It worked. At least 2 of those people whom I shared Christmas treats with have never publicly criticized me again, and I've been much more careful when speaking about them. So big gratitude to Heather Lende for what she helped start. Thanks to Corey Coolidge for making this podcast listenable, and thank you to you, our loyal listeners. On August 15th, from 6 to 7 p.m. on Zoom, we are hosting Ouija Totsi, a longtime political operative here in Anchorage, who will be giving advice about how volunteers can make the biggest difference and helping the candidates that they support succeed in our upcoming elections. Email eastanchoragebookclub@gmail.com for the Zoom link. Thanks again for supporting us over the last year.